Caleb had never imagined his life would come to this. The cold metal cuffs around his wrists bit into his skin, the rough chains dragging behind him as he was led through the crowded streets of Zephyros. The alien world where he had been taken as a slave, the planet, far from the home he once knew on Earth, was strange and unwelcoming. The air was thick, the skies a deep shade of purple, and the towering buildings loomed over everything, casting long shadows on the street below. Every step he took echoed through the narrow alleyways, drawing the eyes of alien onlookers, each of them watching with a mix of curiosity and indifference. He had been captured in a skirmish during a failed attempt to escape the confines of a prison ship, far from Earth. Since then, the days blurred together, long hours of marching, endless hunger, and the brutal treatment from those who saw him as nothing more than an object to be sold and discarded. Now he found himself on the edge of the slave market, a place where beings from countless worlds were auctioned off like livestock, their future sealed by the highest bidder. He didn't know where his captors were taking him, but the grim anticipation in the air was enough to make his stomach twist. The slave market was notorious for its cruelty. He had heard whispers of the horrors that took place behind the walls, and as he was shoved forward into the crowded marketplace, he understood why. The air was thick with the stench of sweat and desperation. Enslaved individuals were lined up in cages, their eyes hollow from the strain of being sold for profit. Caleb's heart pounded as he was pushed forward into the center of the market, where a high platform stood. On it, men and women of all species stood, shackled and lined up for display. The sound of murmurs and bids filled the air, a harsh reminder that to some, he was nothing more than an object of trade. His body ached from the days of forced travel, and though his mind screamed for him to fight back, the chains and guards ensured he had no choice but to remain silent. The crowd parted as another figure approached the platform. This person did not have the same air of authority as the traders and auctioneers, but there was something distinct about her presence. She was tall, with an air of grace that seemed out of place in such a brutal environment. She wore a cloak that hid much of her features, but Caleb could see the outline of her face, sharp, with an elegance that stood out among the rough crowd. She wasn't like the others, who seemed hardened by life and struggle. There was a softness in her eyes, a depth that Caleb found both curious and unfamiliar. She walked towards the auctioneer, her pace confident and steady. Her eyes flicked over the slaves being sold, her gaze stopping momentarily on Caleb. The auctioneer's voice rang out, listing prices and demands. Caleb's heart sank further. He had been here too many times before, waiting for his turn to be auctioned off to some cruel master. The only hope was that someone would take pity on him. Or better yet, bid the least for his life so he could avoid the worst of the traders. As the bidding began, Caleb stood silently, his shoulders slumped in resignation. The noise of the crowd faded into the background, and he tried to focus on nothing other than the sense of helplessness that washed over him. He had no family, no friends here. He was just one more soul caught in the web of alien politics and greed. But then, to Caleb's surprise, the woman spoke. Her voice was calm, but there was a strength in it that cut through the noise of the crowd. "I'll take him," she said, her tone unwavering. The auctioneer paused for a moment, clearly surprised by her decision. It wasn't often that someone made such a bold statement in the middle of the bidding process. He looked at her for a moment, as if weighing her worth. "And what will you offer, lady?" he asked, his voice dripping with mock politeness. Without a second thought, she reached into her cloak and produced a small, ornate device. The auctioneer's eyes widened when he saw it, a symbol of authority from the royal family. He immediately stepped back, his tone shifting. "Of course, Your Highness."
"You may have him." There was no further argument, no more haggling.
The crowd parted as the woman made her way to the platform. Caleb watched in disbelief as she stepped forward. He had no idea who she was or why she would pay for his freedom. But before he could say anything, the chains around his wrists were unlocked with a soft click, and the weight that had been pulling him down for what felt like an eternity was gone. You are free, she said simply, her gaze meeting his for the first time. There was something in her eyes, a mixture of compassion and determination, that made Caleb feel both confused and strangely hopeful.
Why? He managed to ask, his voice hoarse from days of silence. Her lips curled into a faint smile, but she did not answer immediately.
Instead, she turned to the guards and issued a command to take him to a different location. She spoke with the authority of someone used to being obeyed, and Caleb found himself being escorted away from the market and into the back streets of the city. As they walked, he could feel the weight of her presence beside him. He had no idea what to make of the situation. He had seen many masters in his time in captivity, but none like her. There was something almost regal about her, but at the same time she seemed to carry herself with a humility that was out of place in a world ruled by the powerful. When they reached a quiet alley, she stopped and turned to him. "My name is Lyra," she said, "and I bought you because I couldn't stand the thought of you being sold like an object." Caleb blinked, still trying to process everything that was happening. His mind raced as he tried to piece together the situation. "You bought me?" he repeated, still uncertain whether he was dreaming.
Lyra nodded. Yes, I couldn't just let you stay in that market. I know what happens to those who end up in the hands of the wrong people.
Her words were strange to Caleb. In his world, freedom was a right, not a privilege. But here, on Zephyros, everything was different. He was a foreigner in a land where the rules didn't align with the ones he had known. "Who are you?" he asked, his curiosity finally overcoming his confusion. Lyra hesitated for a moment before answering. "I am Princess Lyra," she said softly. "I come from the royal family of this planet." "But you don't need to worry about that right now." Caleb's eyes widened. He had been freed by a princess. His mind spun with the implications of what she had just said, but before he could say anything more, Lyra held up her hand to stop him. "I will take you to a safe place," she continued, her voice steady. "But you must promise me one thing." Caleb nodded, eager to understand more about what was happening. "Anything. Don't tell anyone who I am," she said firmly. "Not yet. There are many here who would use my name for their own purposes." "I don't want that to happen to you." Caleb couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude towards her. She didn't owe him anything, yet she had chosen to save him from the same fate that had claimed countless others. He didn't know why, but he knew one thing for sure. He owed her his life. "I promise," he said, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside him. Lyra nodded, satisfied with his answer. "Good. Now, let's get you out of here." Together, they walked away from the market. Caleb's chains now gone, and the weight of his past life lifting. As they made their way through the dark streets of Zephyros, Caleb couldn't help but wonder where this strange twist of fate would lead him. But for now, he was free, and that was all that mattered. And as they disappeared into the shadows, a sense of hope, something Caleb had not felt in a long time, flickered in his chest. He didn't know what the future held. But for the first time since his capture, he felt like he had a chance at something more than just survival. Caleb couldn't remember the last time he had felt so confused. The streets of Zephyros were unfamiliar, their sounds and smells foreign to him. But the one thing that stood out the most was the woman walking beside him. Princess Lyra, as she had introduced herself, had just freed him from the cruel hands of the slave traders, and yet he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her than she had revealed. She didn't look like royalty. Her clothes were simple, a plain cloak that didn't scream wealth or power. Yet, her presence was undeniable. The calm way she carried herself, the authority in her voice when she spoke to the guards. Caleb could tell that she was someone who was used to getting what she wanted, but there was no arrogance in her eyes. No trace of the coldness Caleb had seen in the other rulers of this alien planet. Instead, her gaze was warm, like she was trying to make him feel safe in a world that had been nothing but dangerous. They walked in silence, the soft thud of their footsteps echoing in the narrow alleyways of the city. Caleb found himself unable to speak, unsure of how to ask the questions swirling in his mind. He had been through so much since his capture, and now, standing beside this mysterious woman, he had no idea what to make of it all. Why had she helped him? Why had she chosen to free him out of all the others in that market? Was it pity? Or was there something else? Lyra, seemingly aware of his confusion, finally spoke.
I know you have questions.
But right now, it's better that you don't ask too many. There are eyes everywhere, and some people would rather see me disappear. Caleb nodded, his mind racing. He had heard rumors, whispers in the market about the political tensions on Zephyros, but he hadn't paid much attention to them. Now, standing in front of the princess, the reality of it all seemed much more real. I understand, he said softly, but you still haven't told me why you did it. Why me? Lyra glanced at him, her face unreadable for a moment. Then she sighed, as if weighing whether to tell him the truth. Because I couldn't stand the thought of you being sold. I couldn't stand the idea that you would live the rest of your life as someone else's property, as though you didn't matter. Caleb felt a lump form in his throat at her words. He had been a slave for so long, had felt like he was nothing but a tool to be used. No one had ever spoken to him like that, like he mattered. It was overwhelming. He had been captured so many months ago, and the only thing that had kept him going was the thought that someday, somehow, he would escape. But now, that escape had come, not in the way he had imagined, but in the form of a princess who had saved him without a second thought. Lyra turned to him, her eyes searching his face as if trying to gauge his thoughts. I know this must be confusing for you, she said. But I promise, I'm not your enemy. I've been trying to make things right for years. The empire I belong to, my father's empire, it's corrupt. It's built on the backs of people like you, and I can't stand it anymore. Caleb blinked. He hadn't expected to hear her speak so openly about her family, especially not with such disdain. The princess was supposed to be part of that empire, wasn't she? She should have been just like her father, cold and indifferent to the suffering of others. Yet here she was, standing before him, vowing to change everything. It didn't make sense. You're trying to change the empire? Caleb asked, his voice filled with disbelief. But you're part of it. You're the princess. Doesn't that make you the enemy? Lyra looked away, her expression troubled. I used to believe that too. But I've seen what happens to those who question the empire. Now, my father's rule is absolute. Anyone who opposes him is either killed or imprisoned. But I'm not like him. I can't be. Caleb's mind raced. If what she was saying was true, then Lyra wasn't just a princess. She was a rebel, fighting against everything her family had built. The thought both amazed and terrified him.
So, what now? He asked.
Where do we go from here? Lyra paused for a moment, as if considering his question.
I'll take you somewhere safe.
Somewhere we can lay low for a while. She gave him a reassuring smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. I won't let anyone hurt you. You have my word. They walked for what felt like hours, the city slowly fading behind them as they ventured deeper into the outskirts. Caleb had no idea where they were going or what Lyra's plan was, but he trusted her. At least, he trusted her more than anyone else he had met on this planet. He wasn't sure why she had chosen to help him, but something about the way she spoke, the way she looked at him, made him believe that she genuinely wanted to make a difference. Eventually, they reached a secluded area, a small house hidden among the trees. It was simple, modest even, but there was something comforting about it. Caleb could see the care that had gone into making it a safe haven. There were no guards, no prying eyes. It felt like a place where they could finally breathe. Lyra led him inside and gestured for him to sit. This is my home. she said, her voice softening. It's not much, but it's safe. Caleb took a seat on the low bench, looking around the room. There were bookshelves filled with old texts, a small table with a few chairs, and a fire burning in the corner. The atmosphere was calm, quiet, everything he had never experienced in his months of captivity. He felt his shoulders relax for the first time in so long. Lyra moved to the small kitchen area and began preparing something to eat. Caleb watched her for a moment, still processing everything she had told him. The fact that she was a princess, a member of the ruling family, was hard to believe. He had expected her to be just another rich, spoiled aristocrat. But she was nothing like that. She was kind, genuine, and willing to risk everything for people like him. "What's your plan?" Caleb asked, his curiosity getting the best of him.
How do you plan to stop your father? Lyra paused, her hands stilling over the food she was preparing. She took a deep breath and turned to face him.
"I don't know yet," she admitted, "but I've been collecting allies, people who are tired of the Empire's cruelty."
Slowly. I'm building a network. We'll fight back, together.
Caleb nodded slowly, a sense of admiration building inside him. He didn't know how they would succeed, but the idea of fighting for something bigger than himself was appealing. For so long he had only fought to survive, to escape. But now with Lyra, there was a chance to do something more, to help her bring down the empire that had taken so much from him and countless others. After a long silence, Lyra spoke again, her voice softer now. "You don't have to stay. If you want to leave, I won't stop you. I know I'm asking a lot of you, and I don't want to force you into something you're not ready for." Caleb thought for a moment. He had been given a choice, to leave or to stay. It was a strange feeling, being offered a choice after everything he had been through. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that he didn't want to leave. He didn't want to go back to being a slave, to hiding in the shadows. He wanted to fight, to stand beside Lyra and help her change the empire. "I'm with you," he said, his voice steady. "I'll help you bring your father down. Together." Lyra's eyes softened, and for the first time, Caleb saw a flicker of hope in them. "Thank you," she said, her voice full of gratitude. "You don't know how much this means to me." As they sat together in the quiet house, the weight of their future ahead of them settled in. They didn't know what challenges lay in store, but one thing was certain. They would face them together. And for the first time in a long while, Caleb felt like he was part of something that mattered, something bigger than just surviving, something that could change everything. The days that followed felt like a blur to Caleb. Each morning, he woke to the quiet of Lyra's secluded house, the sound of birds outside, and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. It was a stark contrast to the chaos of the slave market and the fear that had plagued him for so long. For the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. At least, as much peace as one could feel when surrounded by a world that was on the brink of change. Lyra had kept her word. The house was safe, a place where they could hide from the prying eyes of the Empire. She continued to care for him, providing food, water, and a place to rest. But as the days went by, Caleb realized that the quiet was only temporary. Lyra wasn't someone who could stay hidden forever. She had a mission, one that would require her to fight the very empire that had raised her. And Caleb was now part of that fight. He couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency in the air. Lyra's conversations with her allies became more frequent. They spoke in hushed tones, the topics heavy with political intrigue. Caleb, still new to the world of rebellion, listened closely. He had been a soldier, a fighter, but this was different. This wasn't about combat on a battlefield. This was about dismantling an empire from within. It was a battle of wits, of strategy, and Caleb wasn't sure where he fit into all of it. He had been trained for war, not for revolution. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the ground, Lyra sat beside him. She had been quieter than usual that day, her eyes distant as if lost in thought. Caleb didn't press her for answers. He had learned by now that Lyra only spoke when she was ready. But tonight, she seemed to have something on her mind. Caleb, she said, her voice softer than usual. I need to tell you something. He turned to face her, his curiosity piqued. What is it? I can't do this alone, she said quietly. I need your help more than you know. Caleb frowned slightly. I'm already helping. I'm here, aren't I? Lyra nodded. But there was something in her expression that told him this was about more than just being there. You're more than just a body to stand beside me. You're someone who can make a difference. You've seen the Empire up close. You know what it's like to live under its control. But there's more to this than just overthrowing my father. It's about rebuilding everything that has been broken. Caleb listened intently. The weight of her words settled over him. He had been so focused on survival, so consumed by his own need to escape, that he hadn't fully grasped the scope of what Lyra was trying to do. This wasn't just about freeing slaves or bringing down one man. It was about changing a system, a way of life that had been ingrained for generations. It was about giving the people of Zephyros something they had never had. Hope. What exactly do you need me to do? Caleb asked, his voice steady. Lyra met his gaze, her eyes serious. We need to make alliances with those who are willing to fight. There are groups across the planet, people who have been oppressed by the Empire, people who want change but don't know how to make it happen. I need you to help me bring them together. Caleb nodded. He understood now. This was no longer just about one rebellion. It was about uniting a fractured world, about creating a coalition that could stand against the Empire's might. It was a daunting task, and it would take time. But he could see now why Lyra had chosen him. His experience in the military, his ability to think strategically, could be invaluable in this fight. I'll help you, he said, the determination in his voice clear. But we can't do this alone. We'll need more than just words. Lyra's lips curved into a small smile. I know. That's why we need to be careful. The Empire is always watching. One wrong move, and everything we've worked for could be destroyed. The next few days were filled with planning. Caleb and Lyra spent their time meeting with contacts, individuals who had been part of the rebellion for years. Some who had only just begun to make their voices heard. There were few who were willing to meet openly, so their meetings were held in secret locations, away from prying eyes. Caleb's role in these meetings quickly became clear. He was the one who could speak to the military groups, the ones who had fought and bled under the Empire's rule. He was the one who could bridge the gap between the different factions, offering them something more than just words. He was the one who could inspire them to take action. At first, it wasn't easy. Many of the groups were hesitant, afraid of what would happen if they aligned themselves with the princess. They feared the Empire's wrath, the consequences of crossing such a powerful force. But Caleb was persistent. He spoke of his own experiences, of the suffering he had seen, and the need for change. Slowly, they began to listen. Slowly, they began to see that the fight wasn't just for the people of Zephyros. It was for the future of their planet, their children, their freedom. By the end of the week, they had managed to form a loose coalition. It wasn't much, but it was a start. They had allies in the military, in the underground resistance, and even among the merchant classes, who had long been oppressed by the Empire's heavy taxes and corruption. But Caleb knew it wasn't enough. They needed more. You've done well, Lyra said one evening as they sat in the quiet of the house, the flickering light from the fire casting shadows on the walls. But we're still not there yet. We need to make a bigger move. We need to hit the Empire where it hurts. Caleb raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? There's a weapons depot in the southern region, Lyra explained. It's heavily guarded, but it's the key to the Empire's military strength.
If we can take it out, we'll cripple their ability to respond to any uprising. We'll force them to the negotiating table.
Caleb frowned. And how do you plan to get to it? Lyra's eyes gleamed with determination. That's where you come in.
You and your contacts in the military will lead a strike force. I'll handle the political side, getting the support we need from the factions we've gathered.
It was a bold plan, and Caleb could see the risks involved. The Empire wouldn't take kindly to an attack on one of their most important military assets.
But he also knew that this was the kind of move they needed to make. It was time to show the Empire that they weren't afraid. It was time to strike back.
We'll need more than just a few soldiers,
Caleb said, his mind already turning over the logistics.
We'll need a plan, a way to infiltrate the depot without being detected.
Lyra nodded.
We'll use the element of surprise. I'll send a few trusted allies to gather intel on the depot's defenses.
You'll need to move fast, hit them hard, and get out before they can mount a counterattack. Caleb's heart raced. This was it. This was the turning point. They were no longer hiding in the shadows waiting for the right moment. They were going to make their move. As the days passed, the plan began to take shape. Caleb worked with the military contacts to coordinate the strike force, while Lyra continued to build support among the civilian factions. They had their allies. And now it was time to see if they could pull it all together. On the night before the strike, Caleb stood outside the house, staring up at the stars. Then the air was cool, the sky clear. For a moment he allowed himself to think of Earth, the home he had lost, and the family he would never see again. He thought of the life he had left behind, the simple, quiet life he had once known, and wondered if he would ever find peace again. But then he remembered Lyra and the hope she had given him. She was a beacon in the darkness, and he wasn't about to let that light go out. The next morning, they would strike. The night before the strike, Caleb lay awake on the narrow cot in the small room that had become his temporary home. The walls of the house were thin, the wind outside rattling the windows as it moved through the trees. He stared up at the ceiling, his mind running over the plan they had devised. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, they would take the fight to the Empire. The weight of it all sat heavy on his chest. It wasn't just about the weapons depot anymore. It wasn't just about crippling the Empire's military. It was about sending a message, one that would reach every corner of Zephyrus. A message that said they would not be silenced. They would not be crushed under the heel of an oppressive empire. The rebellion was no longer just a dream. It was becoming a reality. The plan had been set in motion. Lyra had rallied the support of various factions across the planet. Military leaders, resistance groups, and civilians who had long been oppressed by the Empire. Caleb had worked alongside his old military contacts, organizing the strike force, securing the necessary equipment, and making sure everything was in place for the attack. It had taken days of careful coordination, but now they were ready. He ran his fingers through his hair and sat up. He couldn't rest. Not yet. There was too much at stake. He had been a soldier before, trained for combat, but this was different. This wasn't about following orders. This was about making history. This was about changing the course of the planet's future. Outside, the sound of footsteps caught his attention. He stood and moved toward the window, his eyes scanning the yard below. Lyra was walking alone in the dark, her figure silhouetted against the moonlight. Caleb had grown accustomed to her presence in the days they had spent together, but tonight, she seemed different. Her movements were purposeful, her shoulders tense, as if she carried the weight of the world on them. Without thinking, he opened the door and stepped outside, the cool night air hitting him immediately. He walked toward her, his boots crunching against the ground. She stopped when she heard him approach, but didn't turn to face him. "I thought you'd be asleep," Lyra said quietly, her voice low as she continued to look ahead. "I couldn't sleep," Caleb replied. "There's too much on my mind." Lyra finally turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the moon. "I understand. Tomorrow will change everything." He nodded, his eyes meeting hers. "Are you ready for it?" Lyra hesitated for a moment before answering, her expression unreadable. "I'm not. I'm not sure. I've been planning this for so long, but now that it's real, it feels different. It's not just about me anymore, Caleb. It's about all of us. This could be the moment that defines everything. Or it could be the moment we lose it all. Caleb looked at her, seeing the vulnerability she usually kept hidden behind a mask of strength. We're not going to lose it all. We have a chance to win this, and we have people who believe in what we're doing. Lyra's eyes softened, and for a brief moment, Caleb saw the girl who had once dreamed of a different life, free from the weight of her royal blood and the Empire's expectations.
I hope you're right.
I hope we can win. They stood in silence for a few moments, the weight of the future hanging between them. The wind rustled the trees, but neither of them moved. Finally, Lyra spoke again. We'll start at dawn, she said, her voice steady once more. We hit the weapons depot with everything we've got. We take it, then we get out before they can retaliate. If we succeed, we'll have the power to move forward. If we fail... She trailed off, but Caleb could hear the unspoken words hanging in the air. If they failed, everything would be over. The rebellion would be crushed before it had even begun. There was no room for error. We won't fail, Caleb said firmly, his resolve hardening. Lyra nodded, her gaze lingering on him for a moment longer before she turned and walked back toward the house. Caleb followed, his mind racing. Tomorrow would be the beginning of something bigger than himself, something bigger than either of them. But it was also the beginning of a war, one that would test them all in ways they couldn't yet understand. The next morning, the sun rose over Zephyros with a strange sense of calm. The streets of the city were quiet, almost eerily so. Caleb stood at the edge of the yard, watching the first light of day break across the sky. He had spent the night making final preparations, checking the gear, ensuring the strike force was in place. He felt ready. But beneath that readiness, a sense of unease lingered. Are you ready? Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts. He turned to see her standing behind him, fully dressed in tactical gear, her face set in a determined expression. She had transformed from the princess he had first met into a leader, a warrior ready to fight for her people. I'm ready, Caleb said, turning to face her. We do this together, Lyra nodded, and without another word, they made their way to the meeting point where the strike force had gathered. It was a small clearing in the forest, far from the city's prying eyes. The group of rebels, soldiers, civilians, and resistance fighters stood in a loose circle, their faces a mixture of determination and fear. The weight of what they were about to do hung in the air like a cloud. Caleb took his place at the front of the group, his eyes scanning the faces of the men and women around him. He could see the fear in their eyes, but there was also a spark of hope. Hope that they could win. Hope that they could change their world. Lyra stepped forward and addressed the group, her voice strong and clear. Today, we take the first step toward our freedom. We strike at the heart of the Empire's military. We take the weapons depot, and we show the Empire that we will no longer be silenced. The crowd murmured in agreement, their resolve solidifying with each passing word. Caleb felt a surge of energy, a sense of unity among them all. For the first time since he had arrived on Zephyros, he felt like they could win this fight. The plan was simple. He knew the infiltration team had their work cut out for them, but he had faith in her. She had proven herself time and time again. When they reached the extraction point, Caleb checked his watch. The charges were set to go off in 3 minutes. He motioned for his team to fall back into the trees, and they waited in silence, holding their breath. And then, the explosion came. The sound of the blast echoed through the valley, a thunderous roar that shook the ground beneath their feet. Caleb's heart skipped a beat. The depot was gone. The Empire had just taken its first real blow, but there was no time to celebrate. The sound of approaching sirens filled the air, and Caleb knew the Empire would be coming for them. They had won this round, but the war was just beginning. As they retreated into the forest, Caleb couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. They had done it. They had struck at the heart of the Empire, and they had succeeded. But this was only the beginning.